Coming fresh off of a discussion about the philosophy of Psycho-Pass 1, I was ready to jump into Psycho-Pass 2 for a second time to take a second look. I remembered it wasn't quite the same, but still held it in a higher regard than most anime second seasons. I really shouldn't have. In my head it was still the same general idea, but they just couldn't top the genius that was Shogo Makishima. Upon closer inspection, there was a whole myriad more problems than just the lack of everyone's favorite philosophy boys. But anyway, sit down, strap in, and get ready, because today we're asking Psycho-Pass 2, what color? So let's start with the basics. It's still a cyberpunk cop drama, right? Wrong. It never was. Sure, Psycho-Pass delivered its message through the means of the MWPSB, which is a government law agency, but is that what it was ever really about? Sure, the early episodes may have taken this form, but the majority of the plot became something of a different volition, and each case individually and as a whole enveloped some meaning about what it was to be human, whether it was a matter of personality, the expression of deeper ideas and concepts, or the thrill of danger. Makishima, as an outlier of the system, drew in people that interested him and gave them a means of expression he could study of his own interest. Although he attempts to take down Sybil, it's only after he determines it removes what it means to be human. Thus, his motive isn't that of a criminal or vengeful foe. He is not driven by some secret connection to a detective or old case. He is independent from all until he finds a true connection with Kogami, and he embraces it for what it is. There's no inherent drama to what he does. If you look at any case in a typical crime show, it's driven by an old connection, revenge, or some sort of drama. But in Season 1, this only exists for Kogami and Akane. It's a reversal of the formula, and from our first look we know the interaction of those two men is what matters. And through it all, Sybil watches as a self-proclaimed omnipotent god, not on either side, but existing as a Grey Reaper. We see its flaws, but also its importance in structure. Without it, society would collapse, as Japan is the only nation left with true law and order. Society is happy under its lies, and this belief in its purity allows it to be so impure and powerful. No one is right, and no one is wrong at the end of the day. Akane fights for the concept of humans in society, Makishima fights for humans' inherent value, and Kogami fights for Kogami. So it's not a cop drama, it's something of a different ideal that flipped a media vessel on its head to get across great interaction, story, themes, mood, pretty much everything very well. And this brings us to the climax of our first major point. Psycho-Pass 2 is just a cop drama. Let's look at the state of Division 1 at the start. A new junior enforcer has a beef with the way Akane runs things. Sure, this looks a little bit like Kogami versus Ginoza, but that was never a question of their characters. The situations where they fought they were forced into through the ripples of Sybil and Makishima. Shimonsky only hates Akane because the script said so? Ginoza had a reason to be reserved and cold to the enforcers. Everyone he cared for left him for that life. Shimonsky has no backstory, no traits that make her call them dogs or distance herself from them. She only acts how she does to fill a role. There needs to be a subordinate gunning for someone else's job in these kind of things. Sybil, the once grey and logical entity overseeing Japan, takes the role of the higher-ups. They're corrupt, and the ace detective is getting too close to their secrets. Sybil is absent for most of Season 2, and really does exist just to serve this role. It also takes a complete 180 from the end of Season 1 with respect to Akane. Her methods and attitude are actually respected by the system, and she is their model citizen. She preserves the structure of their society in place as gods, which Sybil determined before its reveal. So why is she all of a sudden such a problem for Sybil? We see at the end of Season 2, she isn't even gunning to destroy it, rather let it ascend to a more logical and pure level. The entire coalition allows a single mind to have control for most of the season, its ethics and morality is never questioned, and it exists simply as one of the three parties to fill a role. It's one of the biggest missteps I saw, as there's nothing to question at all about Sybil here. It's the clear-cut bad guy. And the rest of Division 1 feels very lost and wasted in the mire of the now tripled cast size. For your typical crime drama, you need another branch, division, squad, whatever you want to call it, to take our heroes off the case, something we see way too much in these 11 episodes.
Think about the pharmacy case. It happens just because. Genoza shows some signs of character and charm, but gets no time to develop into something new and instead just worries about Akane's hue. Yayoi is friends with Shimonsky, but we never see why or how. And Sho is so unimportant he only gets 2 lines on the wiki, and Togane is part of what I'm going to call one-eyed syndrome.
So, let's step to Tokyo Ghoul for a second. I know, what a surprise coming from me, but I think Tokyo Ghoul really sums up a problem that a lot of anime tend to have. In the original, Kaneki was a rarity, he was an oddity, and they show this perfectly with how special he's treated by Tsukiyama and how over the top it is. By the time Route A rolls around, there's 2 more one-eyed ghouls introduced almost immediately, and by the time of Re, it's just a norm. With each iteration, they felt the need to up the ante, but in the same exact way every time. And the same thing can be seen in Psycho Pass 2 with Togane and KAMUI. The reveal of Togane's insanely high crime coefficient has no backing. His story is generic, and we see no development to support it for most of the series, and it's only there to shove suspense into the squad, feeding back into the cop drama. Makishima was an oddity, but he was one of 248. He wasn't interesting as a criminally asymptomatic mind, he was interesting as a man, feeding back into the themes he provoked. Togane was only interesting as a number, which we can see by his reveal being a simple name drop. We see this with KAMUI as well. The last guy's crime coefficient couldn't go up? Well, this next guy you won't even be able to read. There could be someone more dangerous than Makishima without making it a matter of hue. In fact, if they could be read and dead to even 1/10 of what Makishima did, that would be insane. And the scans of Makishima were so powerful. We watched his number drop to 0 as he killed Yuki in cold blood to test the splendor of Akane's character. It gave backing to his words of being a Sybil-proclaimed saint. KAMUI is supposedly more dangerous being unreadable, but it lacks the visual and developmental aspects of the prior situation. Instead of making a legitimately more dangerous villain to keep things fresh, they simply said he was more dangerous. I mean, he sure had some conflicts, but did they even matter? So the main conflicts of Season 1 centered around 2 distinct points, Akane versus Sybil, and Makishima versus Kogami. Sure, minor things happened, but these were lurking in the reasoning for almost every action of the series. It was mano a mano, and each situation influenced the other. When we get to Season 2, we see something very different. Akane was fighting off members of her own division, those ranked higher than her, and the new main villain who had his fingers in a lot of people's pies. Makishima's reservation of focus for one man kept things very succinct and comfortable, but KAMUI was all over the place. He needed Akane to judge the system and himself, 2 inspectors to test his theories and further his plans, 8 dominators for his micro-army to use to overload Sybil, an old friend to host a party for some reason. The list goes on and on. There's constant cuts back to plots A, B, C. It makes the overall flow so much worse and tries to take on more in less than half the episodes. Honestly, as a cop drama, Psycho Pass 2 is decent at least, but this is one aspect where it fell behind in that race. I used to be pretty big into some shows like NCIS, and all the standout conflicts I think back on were very low character count focused. If you've seen it, think Gibbs versus Ari. There's a reason rivalry is such a prevalent concept in these medias. It's compelling to see a couple people go above and beyond their respective bounds to make a change. Kogami and Makishima's conflict grew from a spark to a full-blown wildfire, and everyone around them was dragged in with their own input and effects, but rarely ever in control. Season 2 saw Akane take the main role, but not in a naturally growing conflict, and instead as part of someone else's grand plan. There was no true rivalry, and any hints of one were snuffed out by the sheer amount of conflicts happening at once. It's honestly a shame. The first hints of her new character were actually very strong, but the focus never allowed it to bloom. And changing gear for a second, let's get into some of the reality issues. Clearly, the scientific concepts presented in Psycho Pass are unexplained. Sybil, it's a collection of criminally asymptomatic brains. Dominators, they read someone's psychopaths. These explanations led to even more questions, and that was a good thing. I mean, it's 2114, who are we to say how things work almost 100 years into the future? I never found myself questioning anything because there was no focus on it, no real reason to, or to doubt anything. But the KAMUI premise changed things.
Now, the physical makeup of a human had a role in cymatic scans. The organs of a person mattered. This led the answer from another question to something real and concrete. We all know what organs are, so we can question why they matter to a human psychopath. Going back to season 1, remember when Akane first picks up a Dominator and it speaks to her? That was never explained, but Genoza's comments grounded it into a self-contained reality. It just happened. But then we learn with KAMUI that an inspector's eye is all that makes that connection. In fact, it's the pattern of their eye, as 8 people used Dominators under one account. And what was with that? Why would Sybil allow a clear glitch to keep existing? Sure, they probably never made restrictions because the same person couldn't exist twice, but they didn't think to set restrictions after the first occurrence? And why is Joji Saiga just allowed out to help on this case? I mean, Sybil just stops caring when the plot demands it, and nothing feels logical anymore. Sybil's contradictory actions, KAMUI's plan, they're very weak situations. And as the focus being part of a drama, there's no hiding it. Makishima's plan also had faceless nobodies, a random ace hacker who could crack Sybil, and some other assumption-needing points, but it wasn't grounded into our reality and didn't have a spotlight on it, so it could get away with it. The plot in 2 was kicked off by an event rather than a single man this go-around, the Season of Hell. This started a clear determination of event conflict as the center, so it really needed to be airtight, and we all saw that it wasn't, and the only thing worse was KAMUI himself.
Let's get on to what most people probably want to talk about, and one of the most glaring flaws of Season 2. KAMUI sucks. I mean, let's get a little bit defensive for a second, and realize that being KAMUI is like being Tom Hanks' understudy. It's an almost impossible task, and you're going to face resistance from almost every angle. You're not what people want in that role. But that's about where I'm going to stop being defensive, because even with that in mind, KAMUI is very deserving of the bland Kirito name.
Let's talk motive. Makishima was testing the splendor of humanity, so much so he denied the power of a god to keep playing the game. His attacks on Sybil were a construct of his game, his hardcore ideals and care for the human soul. KAMUI was just a victim out for revenge. The Togenes made him an invisible monster who was refuted from society by forces out of his control, and he sought to right this wrong. His reasoning is very solid and real, which is bad. There's no thought to it. Sybil is wrong and he's out to change that. It's just less interesting and lacks the deeper meaning outside of a few quick ideas in the final episode. The only philosophy he addresses comes in these final moments. And don't even get me started on what color, that doesn't even come close to counting. It's not the questioning of an idea or way of thought, it's a real question with a deliverable answer, as we see. What he does address is the idea of the eye of the beholder, judgment being subjective per party. Over time, more and more pure patrons could judge Sybil, with each one leading it to a higher and higher level, until eventually a pinnacle of perfection is reached. It speaks to the inherent value of a person's soul, and it's a sound and strong idea. But that's all we ever see of it, just a last episode afterthought. I mean, these ideas were the driving forces of Season 1, the connection between Kogami, Makishima, Akane, and Sybil, the reasoning and motive of Akane and Makishima, conflict and acceptance between all of society. There was no end goal, no stopping point in sight. I mean, the ending shows this perfectly with an almost shot-for-shot of the opening. The cycle was about to continue anyway, irrelevant of everything that had happened. It took the focus away from the characters or the plot and put it on the ideas, the strongest part of the show.
Another note in their differences. If Shogo Makishima was real, wouldn't you want to at least meet him for a little bit? Sure, he was the villain in the end, but he was charismatic and gained his followers by feeding their egos and genuinely letting them fulfill their desires. Sure, it was mostly for his study in the end, and he did betray them, but for the time that he was in their lives, he genuinely made them better and improved them.
Rikaka Oreo was his pupil, Toyohisha Senguchi was the only true discussion partner for him, and Ju Sung Cho was his friend and right-hand man. They never shouted his name or spoke to how great he was at every chance, but quietly admired his resolve and company while being interesting on their own. We saw and felt a true connection between them. Then look at KAMUI's falling. Dead-eyed, bland, falling silent in custody and made up of surgical copies. They each boast about his cure, how much he saved them. But where do we actually see this? I mean, he sticks his thumb in Shisui's mouth and all of a sudden she's on his side? It's a thin veil to make us think he's some great mind with supreme skills. We hear about how great it is, we hear about his degree and smarts, it's all talk and no show. He takes almost no direct actions to start, the same as Makishima, but the difference is Makishima started as a watcher, that was the point. He grew into the ace player. KAMUI from the start was a player in the Sibyl game, but didn't get involved enough for us to be involved. He was more of a shadow, kind of like the whole season.
We're close to wrapping up, but we have one thing left to discuss. The shadow of the original season. We already spoke on the hard-to-fill villain shoes, but more than just that, the evolution was scattered. Half of Division 1 is gone or changed in role, there's 2 more divisions to worry about, Akane is in charge, there's a lot that's changed, but they never let it truly or fully evolve.
Akane is jumping out of the way of drones and vaporizing them now, taking Kogami's smarts and moves, and speaking in a manner of confidence that takes Genoza's style and then mixing it with her own optimism and ideals. She's a confirmed badass detective now, and that was a welcome advancement. We see this from day 0 at the end of Season 1, but we still get Kogami flashbacks, so far that he even touches her through one? I mean, she smokes his cigarettes, confides in his old teacher, we get that he's part of her. But it became too much. Saigo was a fairly good character from Season 1. I mean, he helps us see Kogami's origins, a bit of his personality, and where he picked his skills up from. It was a really nice touch, and it makes sense that Akane would go back to him for help, but why did his presence increase from last time? It just felt like another way to try and keep Kogami relevant, even though his effect is already so clear. Kogami was a great character, hell, I handmade a Dominator prop to cosplay him, but his arc was over. Just let him go. We still have part of the cast of Season 1, but they don't do much. The focus is Akane, Shimotsuki, Togane, Kamui, and one other member of Sibyl. So the cast is evolving, but they left the old ones around kind of as a lip service. Genoza and Yayoi are there for lines here and there, but that's really it. They weren't given a place, but you can't just throw them out either. It was a misstep to up the cast size so much and make former players irrelevant backups. It means it's not something new, but it also wasn't what it once was. Shimotsuki also plays on some old concepts. We already covered the enforcers or dogs vibes with Genoza, so her hatred felt so old and unnatural, and again it just seemed to play in some easy tropes. We already talked about losing Kogami, but we also lost Kagari and Masaoka. Now they weren't that important, but each brought unique flavor and perspective to things. They were minor characters with some pretty decent personality, and at the end of the day I felt for both of them. There were small roles to fill, but it just didn't happen, and it meant the cast was just lacking those little bits of personality to really round it out. Also, rest in peace, Kagari, you were the best boy.
That about covers most of the show's specific points. It had a lot of other flaws you see in many anime, like minor throwaway side villains or characters, giving away too much too soon, telling and not showing, but that's not stuff we need to discuss here. Honestly, in a vacuum, Psycho Pass 2 isn't terrible, but I don't really think it should have the Psycho Pass name. It's something clearly distinct and different, which isn't a bad thing by any means, but you have to commit to it and really get it done, which they just didn't do here. 2 didn't feel like it wanted to be a new property, but it ended up as one along the way. This video isn't intended as just some bashing of Psycho Pass 2, but just a comparison between the first and second to really see how they differ, and it's important to learn from mistakes. I don't think there's any problem with taking a closer look at them. And honestly, I like to do these discussions because they apply to a lot of anime in a general sense, and it's just a nice way to help identify the good from the bad. But I have yet to see the Psycho Pass movie, and we do have Season 3 confirmed with a hopeful release of October for this year, so I still have high hopes for the future of this series. Anyway, I don't know how to end videos, and I don't like to do the general YouTube pandering at the end, so I guess I'll just say, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later. Hopefully.